Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I hope you had a great weekend. I'm Richard French. Now, just when you think there may possibly be a way out of the mounting conflict between the U.S. and Iran, both sides, they just ramp up the rhetoric more. This morning, just a few days after he said that he called off an airstrike on Iran 10 minutes before the attack was set to begin, President Trump took another step, levying more sanctions, these aimed at Iran's supreme leader and other top officials. The president gave a rambling explanation as to why he did it, noting it wasn't just because of Iran downing an unmanned American drone in the Gulf last week.
We would love to be able to negotiate a deal if they want to. If they don't want to, that's fine too. But we would love to be able to, and frankly, they might as well do it soon. But obviously, the people of Iran are great people. You know, I know many of them. I lived in New York. Haven't been there very much the last 2.5 years, but I know many Iranians living in New York, and they're fantastic people. I have many friends that are Iranian.
Is this the U.S. response to the Iranians shooting down the drone?
You could probably, Steve, add that into it, but basically this is something that was going to happen anyway.
Iran was, as you'd expect, the main topic on the weekend's political shows. President Trump even went on Meet the Press saying he'd be willing to talk with no preconditions, that as long as Iran does everything he wants them to do.
I'm not looking for war, and if there is, it'll be obliteration like you've never seen before. But I'm not looking to do that. But you can't have a nuclear weapon. You want to talk good, otherwise you can have a bad economy for the next 3 years. Not as far as I'm concerned. No preconditions.
And you'll talk anyway?
Here it is. Look, you can't have nuclear weapons. And if you want to talk about it, good. Otherwise, you can live in a shattered economy for a long time to come.
Now, Trump's top foreign policy team was in action as well this weekend. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, went to Saudi Arabia. The National Security Advisor John Bolton went to Israel as they played bad cop, worse cop when it came to Tehran.
Neither Iran nor any other hostile actor should mistake U.S. prudence and discretion for weakness. No one has granted them a hunting license in the Middle East.
Bolton may be a key to resolving these tensions one way or the other. Tehran, knowing Bolton's long history calling for regime change in Iran, reportedly doesn't trust him or Trump while Bolton has his ear. Iran also claims that cyber attacks launched by the U.S. this weekend failed, but said they would be willing to negotiate with the U.S. if the U.S. goes beyond the nuclear deal that the president ripped up, and they want international guarantees the U.S. would keep its word in a new deal. And for more, let's turn to Tzvi Kahn. He's a senior Iran analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a nonpartisan research institute focusing on foreign policy and national security. Thank you so much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be with you.
Help me out here because I follow this, but I don't really get what the U.S. strategy is or the end game. It seems like it depends who you talk to on what day at what time, but I don't see the clear, at least, game plan, let alone end game for how this thing's resolved.
Well, clearly there's been mixed signals coming out of the administration. At the end of the day, of course, it's the president that will make the final call. And he has repeatedly said that his goal is to bring Iran back to the negotiating table in order to negotiate a new nuclear agreement. I think his strategy right now is to raise the economic costs so high on Iran that it will have to face a choice between either returning to talks with the United States or facing the total collapse of its economy. And today's sanctions that the Trump administration imposed are aiming to heighten that cost, to force Iran into that decision in which it will have to decide whether it wants to survive or whether it's going to want to negotiate with the United States and make real concessions that will address U.S. national security interests.
When Tehran looks at who's across the table for them, forget the mercurial president, but when they look at Bolton and they look at Pompeo, I don't think it's an exaggeration. They legitimately, I think, have a rational reason to wonder if those guys want conflict. They clearly on record that they want regime change. You know, Bolton has been crossing his fingers for a chance to take some military action of some kind against Iran, why should they believe that they have an honest broker across the table?
Well, certainly they have good reason to fear John Bolton, and I think in a certain sense, John Bolton's desire for regime change, I think, serves almost a useful purpose for Trump. I think it's useful for the regime to be afraid of the United States, to fear the costs of what might happen if they don't negotiate a new agreement with the United States and end its malign activity. I do think that I do think the Iranians should be aware, though, that I think if the United States were intent on regime change, I think we might see even more aggressive action on the part of the Trump administration. I think he would say so outright, but the president himself has been saying very clearly over and over again that that's not what he wants. He wants Iran to return to the negotiating table. And I think the Iranians, at the end of the day, will have to make that decision, regardless of what John Bolton says.
A lot of folks have said that we've misplayed this to a degree, and that there aren't that many cards left for us to play, and we're somewhat boxed in. Do you agree with that characterization?
No, I don't. I think the goal is to box Iran in. I think that we have options. I mean, we are the stronger party here. Iran knows that any conventional military conflict with the United States would be a suicide mission on its part. They need their economy to recover. If that doesn't happen, their regime is at risk of collapse. So at the end, it's us that has the cards in, and we're trying to box Iran into a corner. And at the end, it's not a question of whether Iran trusts us or not, or whether Iran wants to negotiate a nuclear deal. It's a question of whether or not they're going to, at the end of the day, they're going to have any choice to negotiate a nuclear deal if they want to survive.
So what would a deal look like that you think would be acceptable to both parties?
Well, I think the Trump administration has articulated 12 conditions or 12 preconditions for a deal. That includes verifiably preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. The original deal reached by the Obama administration with Iran was full of loopholes and vague language and concessions that could not ensure that Iran is verifiably abandoning its nuclear ambitions. And also, the deal did nothing to address Iran's malign conduct throughout the region, whether it's intervention in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon. And I think the Trump administration has rightly said that any nuclear deal, any new deal, is going to have to address those malign conduct and to get Iran to behave really just like a normal country, to adhere to the basic international standards that we would expect any country in the world to adhere to if it wants to have a constructive relationship with the United States.
Well, every one of our allies, with the exception of us, thought we had a deal in place. They supported the deal that Obama had struck, obviously excluding Israel for the moment. And you have skepticism among our allies in terms of some of the claims that we've even made right now. To say that, the world is behind this current administration and their policy towards Iran, and I'm not making Iran into some honest broker here, but that said, no one can show any evidence that they haven't lived up to the terms of the agreement. The president just didn't like the last agreement.
Well, I would dispute that premise. One of the problems with the nuclear deal is that it did not grant full access to a range of sites and activities by Iran that the IAEA has sought access to for many years. So there's a great amount that's unknown about Iran's nuclear activities today. And that makes it very difficult to state whether or not Iran is fully complying with the deal. Now, as to your point about the Trump administration's credibility, I think you're right. I mean, the Trump administration does have a credibility problem, and that's because of the various false statements that Trump routinely makes, not just on Iran, on a range of other issues throughout his foreign and domestic policy. That doesn't change, however, the fact that I do think Trump happens to be right on this issue. And Trump has rightly diagnosed the Iranian threat and called out the fact that this nuclear deal is inadequate to address Iran's malign conduct. The Trump administration is going to have to work very hard to boost that credibility. But at the end of the day, I think the facts speak for themselves, and the facts confirm, I think, what the Trump administration has basically said, which is that Iran's malign conduct needs to end, and it needs to end now.
Mr. Kahn, thank you for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.